Pleased to be here. I'm Steve Ferguson from the National Institutes of Health. I've been working now for 26 years in the central TTO office and also as the department chair for our graduate school program in technology transfer. And so I'm very pleased to be here with you this morning. It's my second visit to Turkey, but my first here in Istanbul. So what I see is a very exciting and vibrant city, and also what I see is emerging a very exciting and vibrant technology transfer, technology development community as well. So I'm very pleased to sort of be here part of this program and hopefully share some insights and provoke some discussion about some activities in this area. So what I'll talk to you today about is something a little bit different in that, most of the program you're going to hear some interesting things about technology and business and the interface. So what I'd like to sort of remind everyone and sort of emphasize is that the whole process that we're talking about in terms of innovation, technology development, we can't forget one thing, and that's going to be the human factor. So what I'm hoping to do today is give you a little bit of a background, a little bit of a story about a case that we worked on back in the United States that had that sort of element in and was done quite successfully. The idea being is that as much as we are excited about patents and licensing and technology and IT and all that sort of technical interface, we want to be sure that at the end of the day that we actually make a difference, and we're going to make a difference in society, and also particularly make a difference in human lives. And that's what we're wanted to cover today. So being in sort of a healthcare background, healthcare situation, the issue that came to our attention was an issue related to disease, not in the United States, not in Europe, but the meningitis, particularly meningitis A and its prevalence in sub-Saharan Africa. So here we have something that's a disease that only occurs in sub-Saharan Africa and has such a devastating effect. And problems occur from year to year to year, almost unsolvable, repeated activity. And the idea is it's in the poorest countries of the world. And the idea being a new vaccine would be a key element to sort of try to sort of solve this problem. Remember, vaccines are the things that, in terms of healthcare, preventative, have a lot of activity. And so you can see, here is a graph showing the problem. So this is something that goes back a number of years, and the epidemics keep occurring again and again in this area of Africa, and sometimes affecting almost 200,000 people. So this is not some rare indication, something that happens only with some sort of minor outbreak from years. This is something on a regular basis, a significant impact on health. Obviously a healthcare problem for Africa, but one that the rest of the world hadn't quite been paying enough attention to. The situation, you put it in terms of economic context, these are the areas of the world that's least able to sort of deal with the issues. Lacking in natural resources, difficult climates, weak sort of economies, and families that are dealing with the disease have very little income in order to sort of either sustain themselves in times of troubles, but also in terms of being able to develop a safe and effective treatment. So we're talking a per capita income of less than $1 a day. Is that better? Oh, was that bad? Oh, good. I think I had the mic upside down. There's always some sort of technical difficulties. So I was saying that this is some of the poorest countries in the world that are at least able to deal with these types of activities, and income of very, very little. The problem was something that could not be solved by traditional business, traditional channels. In terms of the activities, vaccines, you're typically looking to sort of the 5 traditional vaccine companies who are very profitable and sustainable. You know, from our previous speaker, these are companies that have survived over this period of time, but they've been focusing on different markets than this in terms of high-income countries, and not really sort of doing a low-volume products for them. The challenge of us is that there were some alternative channels to look at, and these were up-and-coming suppliers that were selling older, less complex products in the high volume and low margin areas. And these are things that companies that were perhaps good targets, good potential partners as we looked at this issue in order to develop a new technology to sort of address this marketplace. So what were current patients doing? The problem is that for these areas, they didn't really have a very strong health infrastructure. So often the people that became ill were treated just literally on the street or in the side of the road. Very difficult situation for them, something that sort of from a humanitarian perspective is very troubling. So clearly, knowing that a vaccine could be used in a preventative sense would be very helpful in terms of being able to sort of solve these types of problems. So what we're looking at from a strictly business or economic perspective, what were some of the things that we're here? Well, the disease itself, you know, in terms of the treatments and consultations, seems very small cost in terms of, say, Western standards or European standards in terms of the direct medical care and the loss of income. But even though this loss of income was $90 in total, it represented a third of the family's income. So when these types of situations occurred, it wasn't simply a matter of someone was out of work for a few days or they could go to the hospital and be treated. This was considered a major disaster, not only for the patient who had to suffer the condition, but usually that patient's family. So clearly, it's something that wouldn't necessarily would have been a problem in outside of Africa, but in Africa, particularly, it was a devastating effect. The challenge, of course, for looking at this is that it's not so easy in most major markets to bring a new vaccine to market. This shows a pathway for developing a vaccine. You could see that it has many twists, many turns. There's a lot of cost for putting together a traditional vaccine. And these are things that wouldn't be necessarily possible, or even things that we could really seriously consider for this type of marketplace in Africa. Remember, we're talking about a population that's among the poorest in the world, weak economies, and a lack sort of an infrastructure for innovation and product development that we don't see in Western markets. So you could see that with these types of costs, this really wasn't an attractive market for traditional development for traditional companies. So what's sort of the history of this type of activity? Obviously, there have been some vaccines that have been developed over the years that have ended up in developing countries. But the problem is that when they were developed, they were initially sold in Western markets, and it only wasn't until much later that the products were able to be launched in developing countries. So this was sort of a delay in terms of bringing the innovation that had been existed and improved in other markets to bring it on to these other markets that also had substantial populations that needed the treatments, needed the indication to be sort of cured, but they had been delayed. There have been, some good examples have been hepatitis B and Hib conjugate vaccines. Again, very sort of essential vaccines used for a lot of preventive care in just about everywhere in the world. But the uptake and the transfer of these products to the developing world was considerably delayed. In response to that, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation put together a partnership with the World Health Organization and PATH is the Program for Alternative Treatments in Health, to sort of address this issue, saying why do we have to have a delay? Why should the same products, the same types of treatments be available in the developing world soon or as soon, if not, or at the same time even, as the types of activities that we normally expect in the Western markets? So the idea is to sort of take that sort of expertise that we have in terms of vaccine development, but sort of use it in a specialized way to sort of address the issues in a market that had been overlooked. Customers that needed their product had certain characteristics that hadn't otherwise been able to address. So the idea, in terms of the goal as outlined here, was to really just sort of eliminate this epidemic. We saw from the earlier chart that it was occurring year after year after year, and some years up to 200,000 people being affected. How can we break that cycle? How can we sort of find a business method, a technology transfer, a type of development that sort of addresses these issues and finally break this cycle of frustration from a public health perspective and not really being able to address the needs of the customers. So how did this project evolve? Well, first of all, there was customer discovery. I mean, that's the most important aspect, I think, that we can think about in terms of technology development, technology transfer, business development. Is what's the characteristics that a customer would be really interested in? Clearly, the public health officials, based upon interviews and discussions that were had with them, were aware of the epidemic, and they were recognized it as an important public health issue and for the countries, and an important economic issue for them as well. There had been some products used on the marketplace, but they were not as effective, and the cost issues weren't really appropriate. So while there had been some attempts to make a technology transfer, technology development area, it had not been sustainable and had not been effective, and clearly had not broken the cycle for these sorts of vaccines and trying to address this epidemic. One characteristic that was very important was the idea that there was one dominant strain. So unlike some diseases where there's multiple strains, you have to develop multiple products, there's one particular strain, the A type, that was prevalent in Africa, and that was one of the reasons that there hadn't been a really good product for it before, because it had been in Africa, but it meant that if you could develop a good product against the A strain, you would be able to sort of really knock this disease out. So the other thing is that they were looking for more potent. The idea being is that the previous ones had not been as potent. So the idea is sort of have something that would be potent, be produced at a cost that would be affordable, and be able to introduce it in the marketplace in conjunction with the local public health officials. So the key element for this was affordability, 50 cents a dose, and that's a very low number. You know, think of what the cost of medical products are wherever you are in Europe, Western markets, whatever. 50 cents is low. So how do we sort of focus on a technology that's more potent, but actually is less costly? That was the product challenge and the challenge in terms of technology transfer. So the structure came up. This is that they were able to sort of put together some key elements. One was to use rather than a traditional supplier of vaccines, use a supplier or a manufacturer in the developing world, an emerging supplier. The consortium was able to identify these types of activities, identify the raw materials that needed to go into the vaccine, licensing a conjugation method, and find a supplier. So the licensing the conjugation method, that's the part that our program played in terms of that license negotiation, that technology transfer. But you can see they included a number of different activities and partnerships as part of the overall process. So here's what we're trying to do. The idea being is that you can see from some of the earlier vaccines for hepatitis B and Hib, there was a significant delay from the period of time that was available in the US to production in the developing world. You can see that here is like 10 to 12 years. And
quite a lag time also in terms of scale up for the developing world, so there was actually availability of 25 million doses of additional 7 years. So what the idea was that to use the technologies that we were going to be working with, use the concepts of these partnerships to kind of break this cycle for meningitis A, so that even though it's not really a disease in the United States or in the developing world, still be sure that we were able to have almost a zero delay in terms of the launch and zero delay in terms of scaling up to 25 million doses. Clearly a technical challenge, clearly an economic challenge, and clearly a challenge in terms of trying to coordinate all the activities. But again, keeping the human element in mind, that was really sort of the focus of the technology transfer of the business development. So here's what we're sort of the goal, the activity would be over a 10-year period, be able to sort of break the cycle. We were looking at sort of deaths of 130,000, 250,000 in terms of disabilities. And the idea being is that if we could collectively through this activity launch this type of product, not only would it change the face of healthcare and patient treatment in this area, but also would free up additional resources in these countries that could be used to be redeployed for other types of public health issues. Clearly, this area of the world, and as in most countries, there's other aspects related to public health. There's other needs that the public health officials need to deal with. So the idea that for a preventative cure, such as a vaccine, not only would that sort of solve an immediate health problem, but the technology transfer activities and supporting us would then also be able to sort of free up additional resources to solve some other ones. And the idea being is that the financial drain on the economy and the financial drain on the personal lives and families would be mitigated as well. So that was a challenge. So here's kind of the sort of the structure of the relationship. So we had the core team from set up by the funding by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and various partnerships related to not only supplying the components and the conjugation method coming from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and licensed by the NIH, and also with partnership with sort of the Serum Institute of India to develop the overall technology into a vaccine, put all the elements together and scale it up for production. Again, with a target price from what our customers said they could afford to pay 50 cents a dose. So you could see that a number of different parties in the United States, in France, in the Netherlands, were all part and parcel to this. So what was the discovery? What was the innovation that was considered the key element? It came from, this is it here. This is a conjugation method used to help sort of put the pieces of the vaccine together for scale up in a very highly efficient, highly effective methodology. So this was sort of the aha. This was the technology discovery. So the challenge was, how do you take this technology discovery? You know, this is the picture from the whiteboard. How do you take this discovery but still translate it into an innovation that actually has a human effect, human sort of factors in terms of being able to relieve the pain and suffering? And this was so the challenge. So the challenge in terms of technology transfer is that we're starting with this, but yet, and this is in Bethesda, Maryland, and be able to sort of transfer this into something that would be make a difference for patient care in sub-Saharan Africa. That was a challenge, and it's something we were able to work through, but it did take some things. One of the other aspects of it is that it's not just a paper transfer. We have to think about, when we're thinking about technology innovations and technology transfer and business development, it's not just a transfer of patent rights, as was mentioned earlier. It's also the idea of know-how, of other activities, and being able to sort of develop relationships. So our scientists at the FDA hosted a number of scientists from the Serum Institute of India to learn more about the conjugated method and be able to adopt that method into sort of the production systems that they were using to scale up the process in India. So that resulted in a number of visits along to Bethesda, and you can see here some of the scientists who came to stay with us. This shows all the different aspects. It's not just always the technical capabilities that you need in terms of a partnership. There was a lot of different parties that participated in this at various levels to pull together the things that were needed to launch, not only develop, but also launch a new healthcare activity in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's been a very valuable partnership for all concerned. The key element, though, was still being able to use the Serum Institute of India. They're actually the world's probably largest, or one of the world's largest vaccine producers. They had a lot of technical expertise in other types of vaccines, malaria, DPT. So they had a lot of core capabilities. They had excellent facilities, but again, they were able to use this innovation coming from, or this new technology coming from the Food and Drug Administration to integrate it in their process. So the idea is that not only will they be able to sort of use this process, this activity for this one, but hopefully they'll be able to sort of use the expertise and know-how they obtain for other processes as well. So we're hoping that this develops in terms of more of a long-term relationship with this supplier and being able to integrate other types of discoveries coming from our laboratories into future products as well. And in fact, we do have a number of other projects that we are working with this company. So the idea is that, yes, it was for this one, for Africa, but the long-term effects are going to be that we're going to be able to participate in a number of projects with them. And because they were a supplier, a low-cost supplier in the developing world, that helped with our issue in terms of cost. So we had a very high efficient conjugation method to keep make the yields, production yields be very high, and at the same time had lower overhead costs by using this type of supplier who's actually very experienced in terms of these types of things. So in 2010, we had the launch. 20 million people in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger were vaccinated. So the effects were almost immediate. 1 year later, the lowest number of reported cases of meningitis ever. So even within the first year, we started to see this. And partly it was because the numbers are vaccinated, but once you hit certain levels of vaccination, you have something you call herd immunity. So enough people are vaccinated, even the ones that aren't vaccinated don't have exposure to the problem anymore. So it's one of those things that you just starting a little bit in terms of the technology transfer, technology development, all of a sudden you really see the effects. So this is what the product looked like. So it was an injectable vaccine. Here's sort of the map for the rollout for between 20 and 2016. In fact, we just celebrated the completion of the initial phase of the rollout with a meeting earlier this year in Addis Ababa to which was towards both the beginning and the end of the rollout to sort of celebrate the completion of this 6-year strategy. So this shows the technology in action. It's often we sort of see we're working on patents, we're working on contracts, we're working on legal documents. We don't always see the human side of things. So here's an aspect of a technology actually being utilized, and actually in terms of patient care and immunization. So you can see that the settings are very informal, but the idea being able to have a methodology to sort of be able to have these products, these technologies that we're working on reach the public. So here's another setting as well. Again, it's very focused on community health, very customer focused, very much oriented towards sort of being able to sort of make a difference in these people's lives. So how did this sort of shape out? Obviously, this little guy wasn't quite as excited about the product as some of the other people were. But the idea being is that this has turned out to be a very successful model for us, in that unlike licensing traditional companies, we license the technology to the NGO, the non-government organization, and they put together the partnerships with the various parties to get the product developed and launched. A very unusual model, but one that we sort of see has a great potential for other types of rare and orphan indications, or indications such as this that are primarily in developing countries and don't have the large, wealthier customers like you do have in Western and European markets. It turned out to be a very successful product, specifically designed for the African market, one that was able to launch. You can see here from the notes that the results today has been, the incidence has dropped to 0 in vaccinated areas. So it's not often that you can actually say that the product was so successful here. We are very fortunate, but on the other hand, we're very pleased to have this kind of impact on the healthcare market. What's interesting is that the dosage sales, is 250 million so far. So that's 250 million we had at the right price. So we have license agreements, we have a business model, we found sort of something that where all the pieces were in place to make this sustainable. What we were concerned about is that while often we have charitable donations or other type of public assistance for certain types of healthcare issues, that tends to be sort of one-off. It happens one time, but you don't have something that you can count on from year to year. Because the health officials were paying for this, because it had low production costs, this is actually a profitable, but very marginal profit, but still a profitable product for the companies involved. So this is something that is sustainable. So we expect this product will be able to remain on the market. Whether or not for 10 years or not, we'll see. But the idea being is that this is a model that's sustainable and sort of fits traditional models of IP and licensing, but yet has been customized to deal with the market. The other thing that we're able to do later on is develop a form that was able to use without refrigeration, so it did not require cold chain. Again, that's an important aspect of products for the African market, where they do not often have access to extensive refrigeration for long-term storage of medical products. So we've had the initial rollout, and the final rollout should hopefully go to a full 26 African countries. So this partnership was selected by the Licensing Executive Society as one of the deals of distinction. So what's interesting for us is that the comments were that people always talk about the return on investment. And so for the NIH and the FDA, and this was not really a financial return on investment. It was a royalty-bearing license, but obviously, one that sort of reflected the market and the activity. So this was really more of a public health return. And a public health return actually gave us quite a significant sort of impact in terms of our technology. So the idea is that some of the technologies you may be working with in your own areas, you have to measure sort of the total value, not always necessarily a financial return in terms of the activity. And we also were very pleased that this has set the stage for us in terms of showing another type of business model that we can utilize in other activities related to our innovations, our discoveries, to bring those activities to market. So we've actually used this as a model system to even develop a template, a term sheet for working with other NGOs, other non-government organizations who are looking to develop products. And so because of the success story here, we have confidence that we've entered into other agreements with other nonprofit organizations to license and hopefully commercially develop technologies from our laboratories. So again, very much a win-win. So here's a few folks at the awards ceremony. I was very pleased to be able to attend that, and very, very pleased to sort of have the outcome. And here's kind of shows the particular people involved. We always have one person who's always the product champion. We have, really the entrepreneur in terms of working in organization, and that was Mark LaForce. The license negotiation, and our team was led by Peter Sukas, and at the time I was the division director, so I happened to be the signatory for this license. So, you know, there's many deals that you work on over the years, particularly in my career of 26 years in the TTO. And so there's always something that you've wished you'd done better or maybe wish you'd done differently. So I was very pleased to have signed this agreement, and it's worked out very well, not only for us in terms of our highlighting how technology commercialization can actually help and have a great impact in terms of our public health role as a healthcare organization, but also sort of have a sense that it was the right thing to do, and we had unbelievably good results. So that's my challenge for you, is that as you work towards technology development, technology commercialization, here in your evolving and growing business ecosystem, is that don't forget the human factors, and don't forget to sort of take credit and recognition for the human factors, because in the long run, that's what people are going to remember. And in the long term, you want to be sure that you have that impact on your local society, your local institutions, and most important, about people. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.